Good morning. I'd really like to welcome you to this event about the Global Education Monitoring Report 2020 on behalf of the Dutch Commission for UNESCO and the Center of Expertise Global and Inclusive Learning of TUAS, that is the Hague University of Applied Science. We can't see you, but I know you are with many, coming from different organizations and different countries. Thank you for being with us. The overarching theme of the GEM report is inclusive education, a very important topic, especially within the context of the current COVID-19 crisis and the challenges we are facing in the educational sector. Today, we hear about the most remarkable outcomes of the report. Anna Cristina Daddio, one of the senior policy analysts of the GEM report, will share her insights in a few minutes. Today, we especially focus on the Dutch context of the developments the GEM report is addressing. In the Netherlands, inclusive education is on top of the agenda of the Ministry of Education and of a lot of schools and universities. But educators are helping for help and support, how to be inclusive. The diversity of the student population is rapidly changing and the work pressure is high. Therefore, a lot of teachers find it difficult to address all the differences of the students. We did some research in preparation for this event among Dutch teachers on the experiences with inclusion during the lockdown last spring. And it appears 69% of the teachers mention almost a quarter of the students is hard to reach by online education. 65% of the teachers have problems to find out if all students understand the teaching material. 48% don't know which students need more support. And 73% mention they find it more difficult now to assess the well-being of the students than before the COVID-19 crisis. These outcomes underline the importance of inclusive education right at this moment. Rick Wolf, researcher on inclusive education, will elaborate on these outcomes later this morning. During this event, you can ask questions through your private chat box. Be aware you can't see questions of others. So there's nothing wrong with your checkbox. At the end of this event, we will elaborate on your questions during our Q&A. As I said, this event is organized by UNESCO and the Center of Expertise Global and Inclusive Learning from TUAS. This is a very young center. We started April this year. In this center, we pay a lot of attention into research on inclusive education, world citizenship, global learning, sustainable talent development, and philosophy. Themes which are also very important for UNESCO. In the studio where I'm now, we have a few guests, and I'm happy that they're here, given the current measurements because of COVID. In the Netherlands, we are in a restricted quarantine now. In the studio is, on my left side, Kathleen Ferrier. Welcome.
Thank you.
Kathleen is chair of the Dutch Commission for UNESCO. And next to Kathleen is Said Touami. And Said is a member of the Youth Commission of UNESCO, but also you are a student of the Hague University of Applied Sciences.
Thank you.
And on my left side is Rash Rawal, and he is the vice president of TUAS, a university of more than 26,000 students. Let me start, Kathleen, with you. Can you explain the audience why the attention of the GEM report on inclusive education is so important for UNESCO, but also for the world?
Yes. First of all, I'm very happy with this event, and I'm very happy that exactly this year the Global Education Monitor focuses on the importance of inclusion. As we all know, education is the focus, the center point of everything United Nations in general, and certainly UNESCO is focusing on. Everything starts with good education. When we were talking about the Millennium Development Goals, we were basically ticking the boxes. What is the percentage of girls and boys going to schools? Now we know that going to school alone is not enough. We need student-focused education to really get the results we need of education. We are talking about the next generations. We are talking about the skills they need. And if you do not have this focus on inclusiveness, in focusing on the diversity of the students you have in your classroom, you can teach a lot, but what will your students learn? So that is the question we are addressing today. And that is why, as Dutch UNESCO Commission, we find it so important that we get this awareness of the importance of inclusiveness.
So from ticking the boxes to the learning process and
exactly.
to really inclusive education.
Yes.
When we talked a few minutes ago, you shared with us some your own experiences with education in Bangladesh, I think.
In Bangladesh, exactly.
Can you tell us more about that? Because that is a beautiful story also connected with inclusiveness.
It was a huge eye-opener to me. At least once a year, I travel to Chittagong in Bangladesh, where the Asian University for Women is based, and I teach there human rights, you might say. So the Asian University teaches girls in the most underprivileged areas of 19 Asian and South Asian countries. And I have an imagination of the places where my students come from. When I meet them in Chittagong at the campus, I know that they come from refugee camps for Rohingyas. I know that they come from remote areas, rural areas in Afghanistan, or from the garment industry in India and Bangladesh, or the tea plantations in Sri Lanka. But now, unwillingly, I could see their homes when I was teaching online. I could see the circumstances they live in, and I felt as an intruder, intruding in their privacy. And in the meantime, it gave me a much better understanding of where they come from and what words I would need to explain to them what I as a teacher want to explain to them, because I have an insight in their background.
So the COVID crisis make it more happen that we see the difference between the students more.
Yeah, the COVID crisis makes us see the weak points in the tissue of our human societies, our human relations, and makes us see also everything that we took for granted, the things that were so logic to us. For instance, when we talk about diversity, we often think about ethnic diversity, religious diversity, diversity in age, sexual preferences. But now we see another diversity, and that is the access people have to the online education that we need today. So not everybody owns a device for online education. Not everybody is in a place where you can count on Wi-Fi, as I experienced also when I was teaching my students in Bangladesh. So there is a huge awareness of that diversity and a huge awareness that inclusion demands much more from us than we have been aware of so far.
I have a question for Raj Rawal, Vice President of TUAS. Do you recognize this also in the Netherlands? Because Kathleen is talking about her experiences with Bangladesh and
on
Asian
the
countries.
Global level, yes.
But how is it in TUAS?
Absolutely. I think actually Kathleen's story could be translated to here as well. And in a way that's very disappointing. But we're a big university in a big city. But we will have students that don't have access to Wi-Fi. The device issue is the same one that we've wrestled with many times, because students have a choice to make as to what devices they buy, and most people will buy a bigger phone or a tablet, and they'll realise now the laptop is a better tool. They don't have the money to buy a laptop. They don't have the money to do that. Access to Wi-Fi is also difficult, but not only that, something just fundamental as somewhere quiet to be able to work at home. In many cases, students don't necessarily have that. And in that respect also, I think one of the interesting things that you touched on there is the privacy, of the way in which you can work at home and you have an insight into how people work. For many students, our building is a place to go as a sort of social hub, but also a place where they can release and be escaped from that. And you have a sort of facade that you can pretend is the wrong word, but you
sort of a safe space.
Yeah, it's a safe space, but it's a learning environment. And in some cases at home, that isn't necessarily a learning environment. And for many students, and it's not necessarily fair to say this in such a black and white way, but they live with stereotypes. So when a teacher sees how somebody lives at home, that stereotype might be challenged or reinforced.
Yeah. And
unfortunately, sometimes as professionals, we make what we think will be a throwaway comment. I mean, Kathleen and Saeed are sat in front of a bush of grass there, and as a lecturer, I'd be tempted to say something about that. That would be something that could offend somebody.
Yeah.
So that inclusion has changed, and access to the equipment, but also what we do with what happens when people have the equipment is also very, very important.
Interesting. Inclusion changes also because of the COVID crisis. So we are going to think differently about it. I want to go now to the students, Saeed and your fellow student Rishaina. Rishaini, you both made a video about inclusive education at The Hague University. And I think Rishaini Bomberg is now connected with us. Hello, Rishaini. Nice that you are here. We don't hear you now.
Her sound is...
Your sound is not on. Maybe
She should be unmuted.
Yeah. Rishaini is also a member of the youth committee of UNESCO, like Saeed. And Rishaini and Saeed are both students of The Hague University of Applied Sciences. Rishaini, can we hear you now?
We can.
Yes.
Yes,
hi,
welcome.
Everyone. Good morning.
Good morning, loud and clear. You made a video film together with Saeed. We are going to watch this video. It's about inclusive education at TUAS. What is the message you want to give with this video?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Rishaini, and I'm part of the UNESCO Youth Commission and also a student at the University of Applied Sciences. And a few weeks ago, my colleague Saeed and I worked together with the Center of Expertise Global and Inclusive Learning and different students from The Hague University on a very interesting short video for this webinar. And yes, it started with a really, really nice and productive meeting a few weeks ago with the Center of Expertise, and a productive meeting about inclusive education, a culture of we and not a culture of I. And it was interesting for us to hear from different perspectives and different point of views what inclusive education means to these students and how the University can keep working on their inclusiveness. And we heard different meanings, but it all comes together to an education where everyone feels welcome, where everyone feels safe, where they can enjoy quality education regardless of their backgrounds, disability, ethnicity, etc. And education where you have a broader curriculum including different perspectives. So I hope you guys enjoy this video and this webinar.
I like the way you frame it. We want a culture of we instead of a culture of I. We are going to watch the video the students made about inclusive education at TUAS.
Completely different questions.
Hello, my name is Said Touhami. I am 24 years old and I study at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. And I'm also a member of the UNESCO Youth Commission. Today, we're going to interview a few students of the Hague University about the topic inclusive education. What are their views and experiences on inclusive education and what chances do they see here at the Hague University?
Why I think inclusive education is important is because the population of students is changing. The classroom from today is different than the classroom from 30 years ago, but education does not change fast enough as the student population does. And because there are many different stories, many different students, many ways of teaching, it's only natural that the way of giving education or how the curriculum looks like evolves with how the student population evolves as well.
Well, I think inclusive education for me, you can see it from two aspects. So we have inclusive education as humans. So it doesn't matter where you're from, who you are, skin color, sexual orientation, doesn't matter as long as you have the chance to actually study at this university. And then the other aspect is through knowledge. So for example, what we learned in my program in international public management was an economic subject which was called the donut theory. And it's another form from economics that we are used to. And it was such a mind-blowing thing to me because it was a different perspective for economics. So in that case, I think it's very important that you also include different sources of information in order to have a broader perspective. And that also is a part of inclusive education. I think that TUAS is already on the good track because first of all, it's a UNESCO university, which is very important. However, there's always can be improvement. And like I already said, I think really with the part for information-wise, knowledge-wise, I think there should be more inclusiveness in regards of more broader information. So not, for example, only the Western type of information, but also from other regions, which give a different perspective on a certain topic.
Inclusive education to me is having a school environment in which people, regardless of their racial, ethnic background, are welcome, but as well as their gender or disability, whether they have a disability or not, that they can enjoy quality education. I do see opportunities for TUAS to improve its inclusiveness, and this mostly because I do have a friend who is visually disabled, which means that she's blind, and she has told me that she has experienced some difficulties within the university, and because we are a university that promote inclusiveness, I feel like it's something that we need to take into account.
So I think at TUAS we have a really unique experience. We're a school filled with thousands of students and teachers from multiple different backgrounds. And I think that we can really learn a lot from each other. But we often lack the safe space in order to meet and mingle with people from different backgrounds. And I think that, you know, we are in the city of The Hague, which is so international, and we have such an amazing opportunity to do so.
A a very nice film, Said Rishani. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We are going to talk about it later during the conversation. Now I want to introduce Anna Dadio. She is from UNESCO Paris. Hello, Anna. Good morning.
Hi. Good morning.
We are very happy that you are here and that you have some time for us to share your insights about the GEM report 2020 with us. One of the did you see the video? Yes. One of the students.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
One of the students in the video said education doesn't change at the same pace as the student population does. And another student said they lack safe spaces in the university. Do you recognize these experiences in making the GEM report?
Yeah, thanks a lot, and good morning to everyone. Yes, in fact, I will talk briefly about all this in a few minutes, but I just wanted to say that what we heard in the video resonates with what we have found for the GEM report. However, I should say that the main message is really the one of celebrating diversity and make it possible to raise all the issues that the students were talking about safe space, diversity, accessibility, learning material that are relevant and for all. All these elements are present in the report we have prepared and launched this year, and are really core to our recommendations.
And why did you choose inclusive education as an overarching theme for this year?
I mean, this is a more complex question because the theme of the report is chosen in agreement is proposed by the GEM report and proposed to the advisory board of the GEM report, but is a core theme to the agenda to SDG 4, the Sustainable Development 4 agenda, and the Agenda 2030, and is core really to get a quality education that was also mentioned during the video students, and because it's really a cross-cutting theme. If you have inclusion, you raise the quality of education for all learners. And that's why it is important to think about inclusion, not as a piecemeal approach, meaning countries are just tackling some of the issues, but really something that need a strong cooperation between all actors to make this possible.
Interesting that you're saying it's a cross theme and cutting theme. You have a presentation, a PowerPoint for us. You are going to show it, and let's start.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks again. I will talk about some of the main findings of the Global Education Monitoring Report. For those of you who are not familiar with the report, this is really the tool that has the official mandate to monitor progress in SDG 4, the Sustainable Development Goal 4 on education. And this year team, as you were just saying, has been on inclusion in education. We launched the report end of June, and I'm very happy to share these findings with you. Next slide, please. And we know that all countries committed to inclusive education when they signed up for Sustainable Development Goal 4 to be achieved by 2030. And it is a commitment we cannot afford to lose sight of. If anything, the case for it has become really stronger. And we refer to inclusion in the report as a process that embraces diversity. And this is why it is important to think about it as something that helps to build a sense of belonging to achieve social cohesion in societies. And these actions are rooted in the belief that every person has a value and a potential. So it is not about discriminating against nor rejecting anyone. It is instead about adapting to learners, making accommodations, and not conversely about learners adapting to the system. And the case for inclusion, as we all know, has been championed by those supporting the right of people with disabilities to ensure the right to inclusive education is guaranteed in international law. But, as I just said, inclusion is not about one group. And the mindset and the mechanism that generate discrimination and rejections are the same for all those that are excluded. And every society needs to own up to their mechanism that exclude. Next slide, please. The GEM report 2020 has shown that identity, background, and ability still dictate education opportunities too often. And we heard this in the video. And the report has discussed inclusion from two sides, looking both outside and inside the classrooms and the education system. In fact, a discussion of inclusion has to start from the 258 million of children, adolescents, and youth that are completely out of schools. In 12 countries, children with disabilities are 2.5 times more likely never to go to schools than their peers. Adolescent refugees are 3 times more likely to be out of secondary school. And the world set a target for all to complete secondary school by 2030. However, in at least 20 countries, not a single poor woman does. And among those who complete lower secondary schools, the richest students are 2 times more likely to learn basic skills than the poorest. In addition, looking inside schools and classrooms, stigma, stereotypes, and discrimination mean millions more are alienated inside the classrooms and less likely to progress through education. It is the case, for example, of LGBTI students, but also for those students that are not learning their home language. Next slide. And we heard about it, and COVID-19 has added a new layer of complexity. Many online solutions to learning continuity have been inspiring, but they offer just a partial substitute to the education experience. And their uptake is directly linked to the country's income. As you can see on the figures, for example, in primary and secondary education, they were used by about 50% of low-income countries, 73% of lower middle-income countries, and 93% of upper middle-income countries. So this means that low and middle-income countries are at far more disadvantaged starting point for an effective transition to online learning platforms. And in global terms, opportunities to learn online have also been very unequally distributed. Even low-tech solutions are not working. And among the poorest households, for example, in Ethiopia, only 7% own a radio and none own a television. And in Burkina Faso, Burundi, and Chad, just 15% had access to electricity at home. Next slide. And everywhere, disadvantaged students have been the least likely to benefit because they lacked the right device, internet connection, or home environment. Even in OECD countries, those that had attending disadvantaged school or those that were lacking an internet connection at home was as far more disadvantaged. And even we know that on the questionnaires of the Global Coalition for Education, that 40% of low and lower middle income countries has taken no measure to support disadvantaged learners during the school closures. Now, we also know that new GEM report calculation have shown that the global aid is likely to decline by up to $2 billion from 2018 to 2022 as a result of the recession caused by the pandemic. And this is really causing and poses a serious threat to education. In addition, costs related to COVID-19 school closure are expected to increase the annual funding gap by a third. So this means that education budget must be at very least maintained, if not increased. And if we act now with immediate remedial programs, helping children to re-enroll and catch up, this could help to reduce the additional costs due to COVID-19 by 75%. Next slide. Turning now to the recommendation of the report, there is one that matters for all education actors and for all countries. The report calls on countries to widen the understanding. The next slide, please. to understanding the inclusive education to encompass all learners, regardless of identity, background, and ability. Yet we know that this principle is rarely applied in practice. The report found, for example, that 68% of countries have a definition of inclusive education, but only 57% of this definition cover multiple marginalized groups. And still too often, this was one of the messages of the recent policy papers we launched on the World Teachers' Day. The teacher training also embraces diversity as a whole and inclusion as a whole. And too often it focuses on very distinct and specialist topic, for example, children or students with disability. Next slide. The report has other recommendations for governments to help them address the challenge of creating and fostering inclusive education. The first call for targeted finance, because inclusion is not costly by definition, and sometimes simple gestures and ways to manage a classroom are the most valuable contribution to inclusion. Next slide, please. Another important recommendation is to share expertise and resources. In fact, this is really the only way to transition to inclusion. And a legacy of segregation means that human and material resources to support diversity have been still and are still concentrated in a few places and are unequally distributed. The report calls for meaningful consultation with communities, parents, and students. School and governments should, in fact, invite parents and communities to voice their concerns and treat them as equals in the design of policies and programs on inclusion and education. This happens still too rarely. And it calls also for closer cooperation across government, department, sectors, and tiers, so that they are integrated services helping learners with multiple intersecting needs. Next slide. And the cooperation extends also to non-government actors who are critical partners in achieving inclusion. In fact, governments must make space for non-government to challenge and fill the gaps, while also at the same time making sure that these actors are really working towards the same goal of inclusion. The report also called for universal design of learning, which is really crucial for fulfilling each learner's potential, not just in terms of infrastructures as it was originally understood, but in terms of curricula and textbook. Saying that students should learn from the same flexible, relevant, and accessible curricula that recognize diversity is also saying that inclusion really needs to take into account the learning material and the curricula to respond to various learning needs. Another important recommendation that is core to inclusion is about teachers. Teachers need training on inclusion. The educational workforce should be prepared to teach all students and make them feel empowered and learn in collaborative setting. Not only teachers, but also the education, the support teachers, the ed teachers, all the education workforce need training. Ed teachers that fuel an inclusive school ethos are very beneficial to inclusion, as the report shows. And lastly, the report calls for countries to collect data and for inclusion and on inclusion with attention and respect, because the aim is not to label and stigmatize, is really to understand where inclusion should be improved. Next slide. Just to conclude briefly, I should say that alongside the report, next slide, please. The report has also launched a new website that is the PEER, profile of education, enhancing education reviews, where the website address, you can see it on the screen, it is educationprofile.org. PEER forms a triad with the reports to other websites, WIDE, that is on education inequalities, and SCOPE, which uses data visualization to compare trends over time and patterns across countries. I will really very shortly focus on PEER in the next slides. So the PEER profile website includes profiles describing how every country, including yours approaches inclusion in education through its law and policies, and it's really a companion to the 2020 GEM report. And it would be great if you can just explore the website. I gave the address to you, and play a little bit with the content of the profiles. You will see that these include laws and policies about different issues that are addressed in this year report, and is a companion for the team of the report. So we are now preparing the profiles on non-state actors, on gender and inclusive financing that will be launched with the next report or in the next months. So just to conclude, I really would like you to join the conversation, and we shared it with All Means All. And we have also launched the gender report this week on inclusion that discusses some of the issues that make inclusion for girls and women still an important issue despite the progress. And we have also launched the paper on inclusive teaching on the World Teachers' Days. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Anna, for these insights. We used the hashtag All Means All in our communication for this event, and we will use it after this event too, because we have also other events on this issue. But thank you for sharing. I can imagine, audience, that you have questions for Anna or for Kathleen or Rush or Said. You can post them via your private chat box. So, and at the end of this event, we have a Q&A and we will address your questions. Now, we want to talk more about the Dutch context of this report, because that's very important. It is the Dutch launch of the report for UNESCO. We have a few references first, and then we keep on with the conversation. And the first reference is Rick Wolf. And Rick Wolf, he is a researcher at RISBO, a research agency of the Erasmus University Rotterdam. And Rick is an expert in inclusive education. And we both did some research this spring among teachers about their experiences with the lockdown, with education, giving education in the lockdown last spring. At the beginning of this event, I already shared some outcomes of this research, but Rick will elaborate on that more. Welcome, Rick. It's nice that you have for having us here in the studio online.
Good morning, Walter. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Good morning. At the beginning can you tell us more about the research you did, how teachers experience inclusion, and also within the context of the GEM report?
Yeah, okay. First I juggle some with my screen. Thank you. Well, it was the research was interesting in this sense. What and I did a research among teachers in secondary education, but also in higher education. And the interesting thing about this research was that we, first we looked at experiences of teachers with online education and how the interaction is between teachers and their students. But we also tried to embed it more, in a sense that we were also looking at, well, maybe the quality of online education depends also on the quality of the teaching staff as a whole. So the idea was, well, perhaps teachers who have a great sense of belonging within their team are also better supported in delivering their online education, and then that will also increase the quality of education.
Sense of belonging is an very important aspect for the quality of education. Sense of belonging of the teachers.
Exactly, yeah. And
what do you mean by sense of belonging of the teachers?
Okay, the sense of belonging is mainly used in the context of students or pupils. which means that students, they feel belonged in their course program. They have this safe space they are studying in. They like to be at their institution. They like to learn, to study in their learning environment. That's on the level of students, but you can ask the same questions of teachers, of course. And do they have a nice work environment? Do they find support by their colleagues? Do they like to work? Is it a nice? Do they feel at home within their teaching team of teachers?
And what did you find out? Is there a relation between the sense of belonging of the teachers and the way they are inclusive? They have inclusive education. They teach.
Well, yeah. Well, an interesting thing is that when you talk about the interaction between students and teachers, as you also already mentioned in the introduction of this meeting, all teachers have difficulties, find it more difficult to have good interactions with their students. It's harder for them to see if students understand what they are explaining or the instruction. It's hard for them to see if students are feeling well. So that's something you see in general. But an interesting thing we found is that teachers who feel more sense of belonging within their teaching team, they are also in a team that collaborate with each other in giving good quality online education. So, for example, they look at more ways, how can we reach our students? They look at different platforms. How can I be in contact with my students? So it seems that teachers who feel more sense of belonging within their team are better facilitated to deliver this online education.
So I think that's a good message also for all the managers and directors of the universities and schools that they have to invest a lot in the sense of belonging of their teachers. Thank you very much, Chris, for now. I go now to Said. Said Touhami is student of TUAS, but also a youth member of the Youth Commission of UNESCO. Welcome, Said.
Thank you. Thank
in
you.
the studio. You study international public management, but you're also a youth member. What is the opinion of the Youth Commission? Is the Dutch education inclusive enough?
Well, we would never say it's inclusive enough, otherwise we would not campaign and contribute to this webinar. But of course, we have experienced, and when we compare it to other countries, you may see some things that are progressed in the Netherlands. But also a point that Rishani made is changing this culture of I to a culture of we. I want to elaborate on a term because, for instance, now with COVID, it got more visible that we are in need of an inclusive education. And what we propose is that if you want an inclusive education, we need an inclusive culture. Because what are we preparing with this education? Are we preparing men and women with what foresight? And that means that this inclusion is also in small terms. For instance, you can say my country. That's exclusive. But if we want to make it inclusive, we say our country, or my happiness, or our happiness. This changes the dogma and the paradigm that we are in. And I think it is an alternative, and we don't have any other option. And we have to begin with education, because with education, we can prepare that common future, the inclusive future. And that is true, like UNESCO said, building peace in the minds of women and men. That means an education of peace. And that is what we are in need of.
How did you become a youth member of the Youth Commission?
Like the other youth members, there was a vacancy, and we applied for it, and gracefully the UNESCO National Commission have chosen us as one of the 11 commissioners. So we are happy with this, and hopefully we can progress this and work together.
Yeah.
with the National Commission, but also with the Dutch and all the youths around the world.
And what improvements do you see as Said, but also as a commission? What do we need to come to a culture of we? What is needed?
It can be fostered and stimulated by changing our terminology. That is one of the things, but also changing the relation between teacher and student. If I want to feel that I'm contributor to my education, I'm included in my education, the relation between the teacher and student will change. Will have to change because a real partnership instead of a hierarchical relation. You listen to me and you do the homework and then it's fine.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things. And for instance, we have a lot of subjects on school that lack this sense of inclusion. For instance, history. History in each country, not one country, the Netherlands or another, but each country is the most politicized subject. Because we were the heroes of the history, we were on the right side of history. But if the diverse and the hyper diverse cities of today and the future are contained with so many people from so many countries, that will lead to what will it lead? That kind of education.
So you mentioned 3 things already: changing words, and not my country, but our country, not my happiness, our happiness.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned a changing in the relationship between the student and the teacher, not hierarchical, but more cooperative.
Yeah.
And also, for example, the content you get.
Indeed.
You use an example of history.
Yeah, and as Mrs. De Adio said, celebrate diversity, because diversity is you can say you are your specificity, you have your exclusiveness, like I am Said, but to show them they're also part of a bigger whole, of a we. And that part is humanity. That's...
Rush, you are the vice president of a big university, 26,000 students. Said is one of them. What is your response if you hear this? What do you support? How do you support inclusive education at the Hague University?
I support everything, virtually everything that he has said. I think that one of the things that I think is, before I answer that, one of the things I think is very interesting is the statistics that have been presented and that Rick mentioned. I think they give us an insight. What I think is also interesting to know is, did we know these things before COVID? Because I have been in lecture theatres many times, and unfortunately, there hasn't always been everybody listening. It's inhuman. It's an ambition, but it's impractical to have everybody listening. So that connection that we think we don't have now, I don't know if we had it before either. So I think what Rudy said in the videos, education hasn't changed particularly, and he said over 30 years. Actually, you can go back over 150 years. It hasn't changed. And I think the challenge that we have, and what Said's mentioned, is exactly that of partnership. And it's not about hierarchies, it's about the fact that if you're in my classroom, I can learn from you equally as much as you can learn from me. We should be learning from each other, from peers, from the person in front of you, alongside you, etc., etc. And to do that, of course, requires a mind shift. I mean, the one thing I don't agree with is the my country, your country. My country is the United Kingdom. There's nothing wrong with that being my country. The point is my country should be open to you as well. And that's the bit that I think is the challenge in that mindset that's there. I think often what I've heard this morning, and this comes back a little bit to what you've just said as well, is we talk about teaching too much and mix it with learning. And we've moved to a shift where actually learning has become far more important.
Yeah.
And even in one of the slides that Anna presented, there was a contradiction because it says all teachers should be ready to teach, or something like that. I'm not quoting you. And then the next bullet was something about universal design to unlock the potential of all learners. All learners don't have a universal design. Each person learns differently. And that's the challenge that our profession faces, is that learning has become a very individual process. That's not a problem. That's a fantastic thing because we all learn differently. Nobody learns to walk at the same age or the same day. You know, there's not a date of manufacture that says at this point you will learn to walk, at this point you will learn to read, at this point. But yet, for some reason, the educational industry that comes after it starts framing people in years. And then you go into that date of manufacture and everybody does the same. We've now realized that doesn't work.
That's maybe
fantastic.
one of the problems you already says the educational industry.
Yes, but that's exactly why we have to confront that and challenge it. And I think two things that are very important in the I to we is exactly what you said. It's all of us. It's staff and students alike. And that's where sometimes also things happen, is that we tend to talk to students a lot, but not with them. And that needs to shift. We're all responsible for how this works. We're all responsible, exactly as you said, humanity. We're all responsible for moving it forward. And we need to step up to the plate. But we also have to stop thinking that there is an answer for this. It's a process.
Yeah.
And that process we can only take together. And I think that that's the difficulty with inclusion, is that sometimes inclusion actually excludes people, which sounds a bit contradictory, but it can tend to do that. And again, one of the points there was in the report is family backgrounds.
Yeah.
We need to understand that people from different family backgrounds are going to have different barriers, different obstacles. And as a university, what we try to do is celebrate the diversity. It isn't easy, because sometimes that also means the diversity means accepting that somebody might not accept the diversity and engaging in that dialogue with them. And that's also why your centre is so important, because this is the framework where this takes place, to investigate, to understand, to dialogue.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the most interesting thing. And it in what we've heard so far, we've talked about safe spaces, we've talked about learning from each other and so on. These are all processes that we go through, and they take time. But I think what's the lovely thing about COVID, and nobody's probably ever used those two words together at the same time, but it's brought it to the table.
Yes.
And it means we can take it on now.
You recognize that too? It brought us to the table?
Absolutely. And what this report makes very clear, I'm very grateful for the presentation of Mrs. Dadio, is that inclusiveness is a challenge all over the world. No difference wherever you are. And what I like very much in what was being said by Said, but also by Rishaini, is the education. What does it lead to? It leads to an inclusive society where we all can prosper and flourish, and where we build peace in our minds. And so it is, like I was saying in the beginning, it's not ticking the boxes.
Yeah.
It is even not only focusing more on the learning than on the teaching. It is also having in mind what kind of society are we building together now. And that is where teachers and students need each other for this learning process. And as was being brought forward so perfectly, that thanks to COVID, we have a new layer of complexity on the table. But also, this complexity makes it clearer to us that we build our new societies today, where we all need each other.
To be fair, that's where COVID has actually been inclusive. It doesn't care. It's
That's
actually
what
taken everybody.
Yeah, it
and that's where
doesn't look at gender, at nothing. We are all
we can learn from
equal.
it.
Yes, absolutely.
I want to go now to Miri Tupan. Miri Tupan is Executive Director of ECHO, and ECHO is a center of expertise for diversity policies. ECHO is an organization, I think, 25 years old. So Miri, inclusive education is 25 years old or longer?
Much longer, Lotte. The challenges are much longer there. Yeah.
And if you look at the time frame, 25 years, the start of ECHO, and where are we now? Are we making progress in inclusive education?
Well, yes and no. We are making progress, yes, and not just because, and we are making progress because more students from different walks of life are entering, for instance, higher education. And so that's progress in itself. The question is that the progress made by society, or or is it something that evolves because our system provides, our system is accessible and students are being able to enter higher education? And I think a lot of the things have been said by the previous speakers, and I think I wanted to focus a little bit more on strategy. First of all, I think that it is great that UNESCO and the global monitoring projects are focusing on diversity and inclusion, because it creates a sense of urgency. It also provides a comparison between different countries, and it supports the conversation about what is needed. But taking that into account, what you also see, and that's also been said by Raj, for instance, is that it is a very contextualized conversation. I mean, inclusive education means something else in, for instance, Bangladesh that Kathleen was talking about, in the Netherlands, in the US, in different countries, it means something else. But it also, within the Netherlands, has different dimensions. For instance, it has a city dimension, an institutional dimension, a regional dimension. So it is a very multi-layered kind of aim. And that's why it is so hard to grasp it. What I'm very happy about within the report is that there's a lot of emphasis asked for data. I mean, we can talk about great intentions and what we want to do and what we aim for, but it is important that we have data to at least know where we have to focus on, but also to use it to see, have we done it well? And I think and I think one of the things that we struggle with, I think not only in the Netherlands, but in many countries, is that diversity is, there's so many dimensions of diversity. And so we tend to want to embrace all the dimensions of diversity. But at the end of the day, not all groups in society benefit equally from very broad and generic policy. And I think that that's something that we have to take into account. So when you ask me, and especially the work of ECHO, it is important to be very concrete, to be very intentional, and to make sure that you measure it also on that level, and create systems to hold each other accountable.
Miri,
yes.
You all also participate in a very interesting European project, Multi-Include. You did, as ECHO, an analysis on 70 cases about inclusive education all over Europe. What did you learn from that study?
Yes, thank you, Walter. What we learned from that study, the study was the project is Multi-Include, and focuses on a different. So we analyzed 72 cases that were all focusing on inclusive education, and the idea was to develop strategies. And what we came up with, or what our conclusion was, there is not one strategy that could be used by all institutions or governments, or on different levels. But it is possible to look at it from a perspective of that you have certain approaches that apply to many situations and many contexts. And so maybe good to mention that the 72 cases were not only from higher education, but from primary education to higher education, and not only from formal education, but also informal and non-formal education. And one of the things that we saw there is to increase inclusive education on a regional level. You don't only need formal education, and that's something that was also mentioned in the report, but you also need non-formal and informal education suppliers, because they do a lot of work in the communities directly with children and their families.
This resonates with the recommendation of the report that there must be much more space for non-governmental actors to challenge and fill gaps.
Yes.
You have four. Can you shortly tell us the four approaches before we go to the next referent?
Yes, okay, good. There are four approaches that we thought are very important. First of all, we need a holistic approach. So not only education is important, but education is related with healthcare, with socioeconomic background, with living environment, with working environment, the family context. So that's one approach. The other approach is the intersectional approach. Is increasing understanding of what elements of a strategy are important to specific and sometimes overlapping target groups. So also looking at the dynamics within of the group differences. The third approach is the color brave approach, and so the approach and the condition to urge acknowledgement of cultural differences. And that's something that, in many contexts, we're struggling with that. And I think that's an interesting link also to the social movements lately which are part of the Black Lives Matters demonstrations. And the last approach is the pathway approach. And that's the aim to increase education success by developing equitable and realistic pathways to education, as well as within educational systems. So it is important that achieving inclusive education, it's not only a siloed conversation, but it is a conversation within from a pathway perspective.
So four approaches.
Let me keep it there, Lotte.
Yes, four approaches: the holistic approach, the intersectional approach, the color brave approach, and the pathway approach. Thank you very much. We go now to Jos Belen. Jos Belen is a professor global learning of the Center of Expertise Global and Inclusive Learning of TUAS. Jos, welcome also here in the studio. What do you think about the GEM report and how does it relate to your expertise, global learning, and other aspects the Center of Expertise is studying?
Thank you, Walter, and good morning. Yes, I would like to zoom in on one specific element of the report that I'm very happy with, and that's the important place given to professional development of teachers. However, I believe that this should go beyond training for inclusivity. So my research question, my challenge would be something like, how can we facilitate action research with our lecturers that includes inclusivity along with other notions such as internationalization, interculturalization, decolonization, world citizenship, and probably a few others. So not seeing inclusivity in isolation. And why am I saying that? We've learned that offering workshops that separate all these individual complex notions are not so effective and they're not enough. So action research goes much beyond offering training that ticks boxes and doesn't really change anything in the department where the lecturers come from. Many of these notions are rooted in the hidden curriculum. And the hidden curriculum is the traditions, the values that are so familiar in a dominant system that we do not see them anymore. But they can be extremely exclusive if you're not careful. So actually, this professional development, this action research with academics should address hidden curricula explicitly. And you don't fix that with a few workshops. Another reason to focus on action research is that you need to unpack all those complex notions within disciplines. It's very different how you apply them across a range of disciplines. And you can only do that within the departments where academics, so to say, live. Another reason to make this action research intensive is that you have to make it into intentional education, and it has to be embedded in learning outcomes. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. Otherwise, some lecturers may do it and others may not. So if I can give an example of what we are working on right now, it's already been mentioned, online education with an international character. We call it Collaborative Online International Learning, or COIL. And that seems quite inclusive, but in fact it is not automatically. Kathleen at the beginning already mentioned access to and accessibility, Wi-Fi devices, etc. But we should also not forget that students working across borders in a second language, that language may be an exclusion mechanism.
Yep.
So we need inclusive pedagogies to make those practices really collaborative, because otherwise you will have clashes with the hidden curriculum, and that will exclude many or some of the learners.
I think the hidden curriculum is very difficult to talk about, Jos. How do you talk with teachers about the hidden curriculum? Is it a subject they talk about?
It's not usually a topic that they've had discussed before, but you see, for example, in when we prepare lecturers to work in these COIL practices, that we ask them to talk about each other's hidden curriculum, so that it doesn't become an obstacle once they start to facilitate the learning in such a learning environment. So we make it explicit, and it's true that for many people, it is the first time they look at such issues, and they look at the hidden curriculum, and they see how fundamental it is. And the challenge that we have, Walter, is that it's not enough to reach just a few champions of inclusivity or world citizenship or internationalization, because this is for all students. Not only students in international programs, but for all students. And that's why we potentially need all lecturers or teachers. And for the Hague University of Applied Sciences, we are more ambitious than the traditional way of internationalizing education, because that is sending 5% of your students abroad. So in that sense, not much has changed with COVID. And before it was 5%, now it is 0%. That's not a big difference. And so the mobile students who do study abroad have been called cultural elite. So that is very exclusive. And we focus on internationalization at home as a starting point for all students. And that's also where we should connect all those concepts in action research.
It's a nice example of a very concrete education example where you do inclusion, not only the international making more inclusive. Thank you very much, Jos, for your contribution. Kathleen, if you hear all these references, what is your first reaction?
I'm learning a lot this morning, and it's very interesting to hear indeed all these different challenges that we are facing all around the world. And one thing I was not aware of, I was aware of, but it's so good to have it mentioned specifically, is that when we talk about diversity, also language can be a mechanism of inclusion or exclusion. And that makes it clear that, as I said, inclusiveness is a challenge also for the Netherlands, for all parts in the world. And there are many aspects that still need a lot of investigation. And that is why I'm also very grateful to Mary Tupan, who mentioned the importance of data. Because with good attentions alone, this process process will not lead us to the final goal we all want to get, that is inclusive societies where everybody can prosper. So many important things have been said, and I think this gives us a lot of food for thought, but also incentivates us, helps us to come with more concrete actions.
You stressed the importance of data. We have a question from the audience also about data, and it's a question for Anna. Anna, do you hear us? Still hear us? Yes?
Yes.
There is a question, is UNESCO also monitoring the long-term impact of educational inequalities during the corona crisis?
Yeah, in fact, I mean, so what I presented today is the Global Education Monitoring Report 2020, but UNESCO, as an institution, has set up a coalition or an alliance for education with the World Bank and UNICEF that really are monitoring the impact on education of COVID-19, and there are really a huge amount of useful resources on the website of UNESCO about the school closures and the practices that are set up in different countries now to focus to address the impact in the short run of the pandemic. However, what is important is that it's also collecting data. So some of the data that I presented before in my presentation come from the questionnaires, and I'm confident that this data collection will allow to also analyze and make more long-term recommendations. So, for example, I mentioned when I discussed the impact on the age amount of COVID-19, some data. So thanks also to the questionnaires that was used. So we know, for example, that the impact that can have setting up now remedial courses or catch up for those that have been left out of the COVID pandemic immediate impact. So the first thing is really the huge amount of useful resources that are on the website, and also what are we doing as GEM report, because as I said, we have, in addition to the report that includes a section on the COVID impact, we have also monitored the impact of COVID on some particular issues, like, for example, gender, in the new gender report that has been published this Monday. And so what will be the potential impact in the long term if we don't address immediately the issue that staying at home or not living in safe environment can have on girls' education, for example, but also on people with disabilities. Yeah. So yes, the short answer is yes.
Yes, yeah. We are very happy about that, and also very happy that there are so many tools and information and data on your website. The GEM report is producing a lot. Yes. I'm very impressed. We have also a question. It's related to the sense of belonging Rick Wolf was talking about. And I'm going to ask this question to Raj. What should school boards and managers do to enhance the teacher's sense of belonging during COVID-19?
That's a tough one.
Yes,
that's a very tough one.
What did you already do?
Well, this is a question that we've been sort of challenged with since lockdown started. As I said earlier, one of the things that the university building or any educational institution does is it's a hub. It's an interactive hub, and we have an inanely social profession in that we're interested in each other and bringing each other forward and so on. And you take that away, that makes it very difficult. What you can do is we can just try and reach out and care as much as we possibly can. And that sounds, I know, not very concrete, but what I've noticed with how we've gone online and become very professional online is it's become very professional. It's become very business-like. So a meeting is very quick. The chit-chat, the sort of how are you doing, how was your weekend kind of thing, that's disappeared. And I think that we have to try and go back to try and recreate that even if it's in the online setting. And the same thing happens in a class situation with students. The sense of belonging isn't just for the staff, I think it's for the students too. The best learning environments where everyone feels comfortable. Welcome was a word that was used. And I think we have to, as human beings, go back to expressing that interest as well. I don't think that, I really genuinely, I'm not shirking responsibility, but I don't think that's down to a management board or that's up to us as individuals to do. What I can do is try and lead by example and try and do that. But I don't think there's any concrete particular mechanism. You know, yesterday, for example, I had a digital drink. The Dutch word for drink is borrel. My phone unfortunately changes the word borrel into boring. So I had a digital boring that I was telling everybody about, which was very strange. And it's nice, but it's awkward because you can't talk all at once, which of course is what happens in a bottle. So we have to find a way, and I think it's normal to say that we don't have that answer. It's only been 6 months, but
But we have to find some solutions for that. We have also a question for Said. I asked Rush, what can you do for the teachers? But here's a question: how can we, as students and young adults, contribute to more inclusion in schools and society? I think you are already doing it, being a part of the Youth Commission.
Yeah, of course. But this is something that we are preparing our future with, because especially for the younger generations, if we want to have a confidence and a hope for the future, we need to work with the other. And for that, we need a project. We need a shared work. And what is that project? It can be the Sustainable Development Goals. Those are universal. If we cannot come to these universal aims, and those are inclusive, we hope, then it's not able to. Then we cannot work together. But and just as Mr. Bailey said, he said the values that are hidden, the values, and which values are hidden in our culture nowadays? Yeah. Which values are hidden in our societies, in our universities? Is that a value only economic, or are there human values, the interest, the solidarity? If we are putting only the cognitive competences of humans in universities, and we say the rest is your own responsibility, or we'll leave it to religious leaders, or then we're not. Then we lack something. Then we lack a spirit. Then we have a body which is intelligent, but it doesn't have a beating heart.
Yeah,
the body without a soul. But can I say one thing, that when you reach out for these things, and I think do it together. Don't split the generations. We keep talking about students doing this and staff doing it. That belonging is together. We're in this together.
Yes,
and that's the only way it will work.
Definitely.
And also what you said, Kathleen, that we need a shared vision of education, and we together we have to make it.
What are we aiming at, and how are we? How can we achieve it? And that's a long way with many obstacles. But it starts with. I liked very much what you said right now when we were talking about the boring borrel.
I didn't mean that
all together. No, but I can understand. But everything, like what you are also saying so very clearly, it all starts with expressing the interest itself, the interest I have in you as a student, but also as a student for you as a teacher, or wanting to learn from others. And that is often what is lacking, the interest in the other. And I think that there we are challenged specifically now by COVID again, because we are much more closed into our homes, in ourselves, and reaching out based on a genuine interest and curiosity. Who are you?
For instance,
but we have also we need a shared vision. But we have also a system where we're in. It's designed by laws, by policies, by governance, by funding mechanisms. So and these systems are not very inclusive. So how do we have to start to change the system too?
No, I think the report made a very clear point. This is something we cannot leave only for governments and politics. NGOs have a role to play, but it is a responsibility for everybody, each and every one of us. And I think we too often in many societies, but certainly what I see here in the Netherlands is that we wait for the government to take a decision, or we wait for an institution to tell us what to do next. No, we're in this together, and we all have a responsibility.
Exactly, and that's why, for example, when the question you asked me is what can a board or a management do, I struggle with that, because in effect, if I teach, and if a student is not engaged, my first fundamental question is, why aren't you? You shouldn't need a board member to tell you to do that, unfortunately. And I think that sometimes we don't ask that why question exactly.
Exactly.
There's a reason somebody doesn't turn on their camera. Why don't you turn on the camera?
Yeah.
But there's also a question here about accountability.
Yeah.
It was also a question for Mary Tupan, but I think you also can respond.
But Mary is here.
Thank you for your point on the importance of creating systems of accountability. In your experience, what are the most important components one should be aware of when designing a system of accountability to improve inclusion? Mary, you talked about accountability. We talk here at the table also about responsibilities, and that we are all responsible. How can you design in the systems all sorts of layers of accountability?
Mary's mic needs to be on.
Yes. Okay. I think there are different ways. I think the kind of data that is being collected already and presented by UNESCO, but also the data that different governments have, institutions have, is already a way to use the data to hold each other accountable. But I think there is much more. If we talk about sense of belonging, then accountability is also part of the discussion. And because, it is not only a matter of using data to confront each other and in fact forge accountability, but I think accountability is also enhancing a conversation on what do we all expect when we talk about inclusive education. And like the previous speakers already mentioned, that it is a common conversation. It's a conversation between the board of an institution, between faculty, between students, between the broader community. It is a very political discussion also. But I think keep it. So accountability is big and it is very small. It can start on a very micro level. Holding each other accountable is in the first place having a conversation about, are we doing the right thing, and how can we be more smarter? And to be smarter, we need policy. We need to collaborate with each other. And what we often see within institutions is there are many interesting interventions developed to enhance inclusive education, but all those different initiatives don't communicate with each other. And so, you also need a structure to foster accountability and to have to foster the conversation. And those are elements that are part of the that you can enhance within a system or a structure or within an institution. So there's not a concrete answer, but accountability is often used in a way of holding each other responsible. But I think in the process of holding each other responsible, I think it is also helpful to use that process to just have a conversation about what do we expect from each other, and are our expectations, do we understand each other's expectations?
Okay.
And I think that's, yeah.
Thank you very much. I have a question also for Jos Belen. The action research you were talking about, is it action research only with teachers or also other stakeholders? And what is the role of accountability in action research?
I think that students definitely have a role to play in that action research also. That's not done generally, but it should happen more often. And with regards to your question about accountability, linking up to what Miri said about expectations, I think the hidden curriculum that I mentioned is very much about expectations and being open about those and having a collaborative process to look at that hidden curriculum is very much the core of what the action research should be about.
Okay, thank you very much, Jos Belen. Yeah, Said?
Yeah, what I want to say about accountability, we have seen, not only with the Black Lives Matter, but also with the climate actions, that the youth also wants to hold the older generation or any people accountable. Why? Because how can we gain hope in our future if there is not an accountability? So I think that just as we said that we want accountability, but we have to have this thought that we have a confidence in the future, that we are building something.
Yeah.
And this is to make, and what she said, also Mary put on this, there's not a universal, if you make things too broad, then you want to include everybody, but there's no one size fits all. So we need to go what is universal? What can we say that is shared by the Chinese, by the Russian, by the American, by the African, and that is all human values.
But I think in the world we also face a lot of polarization. Polarization and inclusion. How does it fit?
Those are chances. So we can learn to know each other better. These conflicts are just like they were beneath the water, but they came to the surface so that we can see these conflicts as chances to reinvent our ties and to strengthen them. There is no one size fits all, but there is a culture that we can prepare.
And Rush, you want to respond?
In effect, it ties in with Jos's point of the hidden curriculum and what Said said earlier. You know, often as professionals we can look at the hidden curriculum, but we created it. That's why it's hidden. Yeah. And you used the example of history earlier, and that's exactly, if you engage students in looking at this and opening it up themselves, they will do that. They will see that, and that's why I say don't do it as students and don't do it together, because you see it differently to the way I do it. I was trained 30 years before you. The world that I was taught 30 years before I was taught. But that's why we need to do this together. Otherwise, we'll just keep repeating the trends.
So we come back to the culture of we. And also the culture of different generations.
For a future, one with the other and not one against the other, or at the expense of the other.
Exactly. At the expense is the key word.
Exactly.
Yeah. We come to an end of this interesting and informative event. I think we learned a lot about the need for more inclusion. On the sheets of Anna Dadio was also said that we have to invest much more in inclusion, and that the COVID crisis shows us that it is necessary that we invest more in inclusion. It's an ideal. I think we strive for all, UNESCO to us, but also the Center of Expertise of Global Inclusive Learning. Kathleen, do you have, as a representative of UNESCO Netherlands, do you have some closing words for the audience? This is the official Dutch launch of the GEM report here in the Netherlands.
We are extremely happy and proud and very grateful to all participants, all organizers for today to have had this event. And I think that at least let me say, I hope that the takeaway for everybody who was participating in what matter ever, from wherever you are, is that you see that the main takeaway is that we are in this together and that there are many challenges and a lot of opportunities. Let us look at the positive side of this moment we are living in, this difficult year of COVID. What this report gives to us here in the Netherlands, what it makes clear to all of us around the world, we are in this together, many challenges, but a lot of opportunities for all of us, as long as we can really find each other in our desire to create a world where everybody can develop her or his talents.
Thank you very much for these words. I thank you all here at the table to coming to the studio. And also, you don't see it here, but I see a lot of screens before me. And I see Anna Dadio, I see Jos Bele, Rick Wolf, Miri Tupan, Rishani Bomberg. Thank you very much for your contribution. And I also want to thank you, audience, that you participated with so many. We can't see you, but we know you are there. On behalf of the Dutch Commission for UNESCO and the Center of Expertise Global and Inclusive Learning, and to us, I thank you for participating. It is possible to watch this event another time because we recorded it and we will post it on YouTube. You can see it on the website of UNESCO, but also of TUAS, the Center of Expertise, and you can share it with colleagues, of course. Finally, I want to point out another online meeting on November 5th from 16 to 17 hours. This is a follow-up to this event. We organize a big conversation about this topic and the research Rick Wolf was talking about. And we use all your questions you posted because I saw a lot of questions, but we hadn't had the time for all the questions. So we used all those questions for preparing the big conversation. And you all get an invitation for this event. We hope this is a start of a continuing and fruitful conversation about how we can make education, but also the world, more inclusive. And I hope to meet you there, November 5th.
Well, I know that you're young, and I know you're naive, but you know that you got